of photography. Like, they didn't teach photojournalism or anything in my high school photography class. It was just regular standard fundamentals of photography. But I had a teacher that sort of gave me the idea that a camera could be a ticket of sorts to events and things that I otherwise wouldn't get to be a part of. So like, he encouraged me to start taking pictures at my high school's football games. And I remember at the time being like, wait a minute, you're telling me that just because I have a camera in some official capacity, I can go down and be on the sideline of this game rather than up in the stands? That sounds like a whole lot more fun to me. And then I realized that that was the case in many other things, not just football games. And so he got me hooked up with a photographer at the newspaper in my hometown who was really good, was a real mentor to me. I started shooting photos for my hometown newspaper. And then there's not, Wyoming, there are more people in Sedgwick County, Kansas than there are in the entire state of Wyoming. So they encouraged me to maybe think about a larger university to study journalism, and that larger university was the University of Nebraska. And while I was a student there, Nebraska football was sort of the Alabama or Georgia of the time. They lost a total of 4 games. The time I was there, won 2 national championships. So I was able to get exposed to really large scale sports. And that was quite a culture shock, going from high school football games in Wyoming to a stadium of 80,000 fans of a national caliber football program. But it was great exposure for me. The entire time I was a student there, I was a photographer for my campus newspaper, which was quite a bit larger than the Vantage at the time. And every summer I went and did an internship at some newspaper around the country, one of those stops being Wichita, which is how I came to be here. So in that time, when I moved here, I felt really grateful, and I still am, to be here, because as far as, starting out right out of college, that was a pretty good landing spot. Didn't expect to stay, but I have, and I've gotten to do everything and more that I ever dreamed of doing in this business right here from Wichita, so I've been pretty fortunate. So my job entails, and I'll speak to the still photography part of it first. I cover breaking news events, like the weather. I cover feature stories, like if Denise has a story she's writing about a restaurant, maybe I have to go out and take some pictures. Sometimes it's something boring like a building mug. Sometimes it's a portrait of a chef. Sometimes I shoot, this was when this skateboard park opened. So that was the story there. This was a story about invasive species in our waterways. Like this fish called the Asian silver carp isn't supposed to exist in rivers in Kansas, but now it's overwhelming the ecosystems. And when you drive your boat over a school of these fish, they jump out of the water like missiles. So this is a event honoring fallen law enforcement officers. When I was a student in college, photography, have any of you ever taken a photography class? Show of hands. Couple. So, there's a lot to the fundamental part that can make it kind of hard. Now, I know that now we just have our phones, you throw it up, boom, you're done. But, to really learn how to properly expose, there's obviously a lot of things a real camera can do that your phone can't. but sometimes it's hard. You know, there's how fast of a shutter speed should you use? What f-stop on your lens? What ISO setting, meaning the sensitivity of the sensor? All of these things work together to make a correct exposure. Any one of them wrong, your exposure will be wrong. So as a student, of course, you know, I was shooting on film back in the day. I'm that old. You know, it was hard. It felt like math sometimes. And I had a mentor in college. He was actually a National Geographic photographer who was living in Lincoln at the time, still lives there, who said it only takes 3 things to make a great picture. Good composition. And, you know, if you've ever taken an art class, you have some idea what that is. But for me, it means that my pictures are clean. They're free of clutter. They don't have junk in there that doesn't need to be there. I cannot get rid of that junk digitally. I'm not allowed ethically to digitally manipulate my photographs. So I like my photos to be clean. The second thing is good light. There's really nice light outside this morning. There's really bad light in this classroom right now. So I'm looking for good light. And the third thing is a moment or some emotion. And so like I stop on this picture because like this is my idea of all 3 things. If you have all 3 of those things, you'll have a great picture. If you have 2 of them, you'll have a good picture. 2 in any combination. Like good composition, this is what we call rule of thirds. If I drew a line across this picture here, and then 2 vertical lines, you put your subject anywhere on those intersecting points, that's rule of thirds. Here we have good light, good composition. There's nothing in that picture that shouldn't be there. Everything that's in that picture tells a story, and it has some emotion. Good light, a moment, a little cluttered. So those are the things that I'm looking for. Sometimes moments are subtle. Rule of thirds composition. Remember, 2 lines going across horizontally, 2 vertically. Put your subject on those intersecting points, and that would be around that area. In 2003, so a long time ago now, I spent 3 months in Baghdad during the war in Iraq. I went to Afghanistan in 2008. These are some photos from Iraq. So I mentioned digital manipulation. Can't do it. What I can do is crop a photo and correct the color if necessary. Another thing that I can't do is set up a photo. I can't stage a photograph. It's a straight to execution fireable offense if I got caught staging a photograph. It's no different than if Denise wrote a story and fabricated a quote. It's no different than if one of you guys wrote your paper using an AI program. It's cheating. It's not the truth. The exception is when I shoot a portrait. And portraits are done when, you know, it's not possible for me to shoot an action related to the story. In this case, this girl has cancer. I couldn't go to her chemotherapy appointment. So I made the decision to tell her story through a portrait. And because I did that, then now I'm in control of this situation. I see this light in the bedroom. I see the cross on the wall, and I decide I'm going to use these elements to make this portrait. Now, doing photojournalism, what makes it so hard and challenging, and what I like about it, is that aspect that I can't set up photos. I like the challenge of trying to make good photography, moving photographs from real life. And that when you see something that comes from me, you know it's real. Because that's hard. But so then when I shoot a portrait, I think, well, I mean, I can control this situation. I have no excuse to make a bad picture, though I do often. Take this photo, for example. This was a story about the 50th anniversary of the Keeper of the Plains statue. And these two women are descendants of the artist that made it. Now, there's not an action for me to really shoot. I mean, if I couldn't say, hey, let's just go down there and have you walk around. That would be like me. That would be me staging a photograph. Now, if I had heard that they were going to be there anyway, and I didn't tell them what to do, then sure, maybe I could walk around and try to get a photograph of them in action, but I could make a much more telling photograph with a portrait. So that's the exception. Some more portraits. One thing I try to do when I'm working is find situations, and these things exist, and I'm sure that you could all think of some, where it doesn't matter how good or bad you are, or how good or bad you think you are at photography, the situation is so weird that any of you could make a good picture. And I'm looking for those things. I'm not trying to make it hard on myself. I'm looking for the low-hanging fruit. So this story, this family had an old abandoned house on their farm property, and they wanted to tear it down. But instead they decided to donate it to the fire department so the fire department could use it as training about how to attack a house fire. And so they let the fire department train in this house, and in the end they burned it down, and all the neighbors set up lawn chairs to watch this house burn down. Now that's an easy picture. This is an abortion protest, of which there have been hundreds over the years here in Wichita. Now, there's this very famous photographer. If I called up some of his pictures, it's very probable that you would recognize one or some of these famous photos. He was a photographer that was alive during World War II and some conflicts in our world before and after that. His name was Robert Capa, and he said, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. And I have always taken that to heart. I feel like when you're in there, close to a subject, wide angle lens, it gives the viewer of the photograph a feeling like they're a part of that thing rather than looking at something from a distance. And it makes it a little harder. So I'm always trying to find that intimacy. This was a shot, I think Denise may have shared this with you already, of a drowning, where, there, aside from digital manipulation, other ethical concerns are, when do I shoot a picture and when do I not? And when do we publish a picture and when do we not? This is a photograph of the single worst moment of this woman's life, undoubtedly. And the decision was made not to publish this photo. On the flip side, you could say, well, would this be a good reminder to people that don't let your kids run off unsupervised into the neighborhood pond, especially if they can't swim? And there's something to be said for that. But it could be done in a way maybe less invasive than this. This goes back to what I said before. I try not to make it hard on myself. I'm covering a hurricane aftermath in South Carolina here. I see these guys moving all the things out of their trailer house back here. And this is what they decided to save. Now, when I see a guy in a boat coming towards the road holding a deer head, any of you would have made a good picture of this scene. I mean, because it's almost comedic. Some more hurricane, tornadoes. So, let me get into the sports stuff. So, I cover a lot of college basketball. I've been to 4 Final Fours. I've been to, I don't know how many NCAA tournaments in general. If I had brought my laptop, I'd have showed you the video of me getting run over by a KU player at the Final Four. It hurt. But I shoot a lot of college basketball. And I will say that it's getting harder. The environment of college sports is changing, as you know, especially on the larger level. Accessibility is becoming more difficult. Like when I used to shoot, I've shot Shocker basketball for 20 some years now, and in the late 90s, early 2000s, you know, we could say, hey, we want to do a portrait of these 3 players, and we want to bring them on the roof of our building so we can see downtown Wichita in the background. And the sports information guy would be like, great, I'll have him there at such and such time. No way that's happening now. Now it's like, I need to shoot a portrait of these 3 guys, and the sports information guy at Wichita State, not because he's a nice guy, but you know, he's got rules now. It'll be like, okay, come after practice and you can have him for 5 minutes. And so I've got to make something work in that situation. In addition, you know, like at Wichita State, it used to be the baselines of, you know, we're full of photographers. And now they're pushing us out so that they can put seats there that they can sell to the big ticket buyers, even though no one's going to Wichita State games these days. So access is getting more difficult. And then in addition, a lot of schools are like, you know, Wichita State used to have a single person that would shoot photos for their athletic department and their marketing. Now they're showing up with 5, 6, 7, mostly students, shooting photos and videos and, you know, these little hype videos you see on TikTok. And so the marketing arm of sports departments, athletic departments, is growing, and it's pushing out news media coverage a little bit. So it's just getting harder and harder and harder. I would say it's almost easier to shoot pro sports now than it is some college sports. And then, you know, but this is kind of a throwback. They have this tournament here every year called the TBT, the basketball tournament. And it's made up of alumni from these colleges that come back and play a summer game. The winner gets $1 million. And it's definitely way more accessible than some sports. Sometimes I'll do stuff with remote cameras. Obviously that's what this is. That's a whole nother like class of how to manage that stuff. But sometimes I take the same approach I do when I'm shooting my news or feature photos. I'm looking for good light, I'm looking for good composition, I'm looking for emotion, and that's one of the things that's nice about shooting sports. There's a lot of emotion, so that third thing in those list of 3 is often there. I feel like every time I cover a sporting event, I say to myself, okay, there's one thing that's going to happen in this game that's more important than everything else. You know, even if it's a football game that the team wins 59-0, maybe it was the opening kickoff that the winning team ran back for a touchdown and really the game was over at that point. Like, I'm going to say that was the most important, that was the most telling part of this game, and do I have a picture of it? Or maybe it's the last second shot at the buzzer that wins a game. Do I have that picture or not? So I'm looking for those most important, something from that most important moment. And sometimes you don't realize until later what it was, but I'm always looking for that. High school sports a little more accessible for obvious reasons. This is one of those, hey, you can have the guy after practice for 5 minutes. This is at Kansas State, and this is like, I set up these lights, I tested them with a reporter so that this guy could just step into the spot, bang, bang, couple photos, I got it, you're done, thank you. And a lot of times when it comes to portraits of sports players, athletes at college campuses, I have to do it that way. But, you know, sometimes when these things happen, you know, you'll watch the NCAA tournament, for example, and a Cinderella team wins or something. And then you always see like this water thing going on in the locker room, but they only ever let their marketing people in the room for that. Like I rarely can do that. Now in pro sports, and you'll see one of these, they'll hand out a limited number of credentials to some media, for example, to go into the locker room of a Major League Baseball playoff series win when they're throwing champagne all over the place. Sometimes the loser is just as good of a picture as the winner. I mean, one of the things I battled shooting sports, you know how I talked about one of the things I like is clean pictures. I don't like a lot of clutter. Well, like, you know, take this shot for example. I know that the wall of the outfield is going to be covered with these hideous advertisements that are just going to be clutter in my photo. So knowing that this was a championship baseball game and at the end some team was going to dogpile on one another, I found a place where I could get up higher to make sure that I avoided the messiness. Because then this guy just gets lost in that crud on the wall back here. I mean, literally, if I cropped up just a little higher, you would see the beginning of that billboard. And like at Wichita State, here's a sign for Dino's Bar and Grill. Wichita State Coke Arena is the worst. There is bright billboards. It's almost impossible to make a clean picture in that place anymore. Kansas State has a lit up ribbon board right in the back of the end zone, so when you're shooting from the other side, you get this like sunlit advertisement behind the play. It's really hard to work around. But I guess that's where the revenue comes from. This is I gotta tell the story of the game. Nebraska catches a Hail Mary. There's no time on the clock. Look, they dogpile. I'm in the dogpile. If you're not good enough, if your pictures aren't good enough, you're not close enough. The guy that made the winning catch runs off the field. Got to tell the story. PGA championships. I've shot 4 golf majors. I enjoy that. I wouldn't want to shoot a high school golf tournament, but a golf major is a different story. So a lot of emotion in sports, and that's why I like to do it. I mean, how different would have this picture been had I stood 20 feet away with the long lens? But instead I ran in there with the wide angle. So you could feel this kid getting smushed. You could feel this kid. And I want you to feel like when you look at this, like you're part of that mash of high schoolers as well. Does anybody have any questions so far? I'll show you these pictures from Afghanistan. The story here, and this is all portraits for the most part. The company I work for that owns the Wichita Eagle did a big project about what happened to all these guys that were at the Guantanamo prison camp in Cuba that we rounded up after 9/11. Some of them we had for a short while, some of them we had for a long time. We rounded up about 700 dudes from several countries, but mostly Afghanistan. They released several hundred. So we went around to try to find as many of these guys as we could. What were the conditions of their arrest? How were they treated? Were they tortured? And one of the things we found, and then we corroborated their stories with other people who were around them at the time. And it turned out that we rounded up a lot of guys that didn't have anything to do with 9/11. But we threw them in prison for a couple of years and then let them go, and then they were pretty pissed off. So I spent most of my time in Afghanistan, but I also went to Jordan and I went to Albania. These guys are known as an ethnic group called Chinese Uyghurs. They're Muslim, I don't know quite how it's Mongolian almost, in Western China, very oppressed. China wouldn't take them back. Albania was the only country that would take them in as refugees after they were released from Guantanamo. This is a guy that had nothing to do with 9/11, but his rival warlord told the Americans, go get that guy, just as a means to get rid of him. Threw him in Guantanamo, then he came back and joined the Taliban. So, obviously this was, some of these situations were awkward. They were nervous about having their picture taken as much as I was nervous about being around some of these guys, knowing that some of them had shady backgrounds. And some of them didn't, but in the end, once you go to these places and meet people, you generally learn that everybody kind of wants the same thing, which is a little prosperity for themselves and their family and some safety. So yeah, that was a pretty exciting time. Denise, you got some top?
What would you say are the most exciting things you've gotten to do as a photojournalist?
Well, I think when I was younger, the sports things were pretty cool. When I was in my 20s and 30s, and even into my 40s. I mean, the first Final Four I shot, I think that was KU in 2008, and they won it all. I mean, it's not lost on me. I remember how excited I was to be on the baseline of my high school's basketball game, and here I am at the Final Four. And I definitely was overwhelmed with that feeling when I shot the Super Bowl. I shot the Super Bowl that the Chiefs lost to Tampa Bay. But, you know, it was still like, okay, this is pretty neat. But I've just got to see so many things. I did a long-term photo story 20 years ago about a woman that was pregnant with sextuplets, 6 babies at once, and I followed her progress through her pregnancy, and after the babies were born, and the hellscape that was, but I was also in the room for the surgery and the delivery, and that was pretty wild. I traveled to Italy. I've done 2 documentary films about Father Capon. I assume that all of you on this campus must be familiar with who Father Capon is,
You guys
correct?
don't know who he is? Father Capon?
So Father Capon,
Capon.
is the correct word, but we say Capon here in Kansas, was ordained here in your chapel as a priest in 1941, and became an Army chaplain in World War II, served some parishes here in Kansas from the little town of Pilsen. Then he re-upped for the chaplain corps during the Korean War. He was captured by the Chinese and North Koreans during a battle in North Korea in November of 1950. And he eventually died in a North Korean prisoner of war camp in 1951. But not before these stories of his heroism on the battlefield and the things that he did to save the lives of hundreds of soldiers in this POW camp before his own death. So he was awarded the Medal of Honor for his bravery in the Korean War in 2013, and he's currently a candidate for sainthood in the Catholic Church. So my first documentary in 2009 was about who is this guy. So I traveled around the country and interviewed these men who were imprisoned with him, and they told the stories of these amazing feats of bravery on the battlefield and in the prisoner of war camp. So I did that documentary. I went to there was one week I shot Wichita State in the Final Four. It was the picture of the ribbons floating down on the guy after they lost. That was Michigan losing to Louisville in the championship game. And then the next morning, I got on a plane and went to Washington, D.C. to shoot President Obama presenting the Medal of Honor to Father Capon's family. That was in the span of 3 days. So then in 2015, the diocese here in Wichita traveled to Rome to present to the Congregation for the Cause of Saints the book on Father Capon. It's about this thick. Here's why he should be a saint. So I went on that trip, and there was one night I got a nighttime tour of the Vatican museums and the Sistine Chapel, and unlike regular tourists, I got to just hang out by myself in the Sistine Chapel for 10 or 15 minutes and take all the pictures I wanted, and it was a pretty breathtaking moment for me. And then my documentary that won the Emmy was also about Father Capon, because they thought his remains were buried in a mass grave in North Korea and we'd never find them. However, the Department of Defense started digging up these guys, unknown soldiers that were buried in a military cemetery in Hawaii. Remains from the Korean War that were handed over to us by the North Koreans after the war. DNA science had advanced enough that they thought maybe they could start identifying some of these guys, and it turned out one of them was Father Capon. He'd been buried as an unknown soldier in the Punch Bowl Cemetery of Hawaii for 70 years. And so my documentary was about him coming home, and about those men that were still alive came here to see his remains. And I went to Dover, Delaware, and interviewed the DNA scientist that figured it out and made a documentary about that called Once Was Lost. So that those things around that Capon story have presented me some pretty amazing experiences. Probably some of the best. That just kind of like, I can't believe that I'm here in Rome. I can't believe I'm in Hawaii. I can't believe that I'm witnessing these men say thanks to their friend over his bones 70 years later after he saved their lives. Those are things that stay with you. So those would be some of the cooler things.
Okay, I also wanted you to talk a little bit about your interactions with people who are doing the types of jobs that these guys might do if they get a job within their major, which is working with media or marketing for sports teams. What do you think makes a good sports information marketer or director, and what are things that make a bad sports information person?
The answer to this question, and this is a blanket statement for any PR person, like maybe if it's somebody that's sports marketing, sports information, or PR for a restaurant chain, or you name it. Like, this has been one of the biggest changes in my job in the 25 years that I've been doing it. In the past, here's an example, like, I would shoot a story about a player or a coach, let's say at the college level. And I'd show up, and the sports information person would usually just be like, yeah, he's over there, go ahead and grab him. Yeah, they're in the locker room, go on in there. And I would do my job. But now it's like, they want to escort me. They want to stand next to me and try to manipulate the situation so that they can have some control over how it looks. And I get pretty salty when that happens, and sometimes I might say something like, hey, you know what, I got this, I know what I'm doing. But the best thing you can do when you're dealing with a journalist is let them do their job. They're working for an organization that works without bias, and they're the ones telling the story, not you. And it's important to let them do their job. I remember shooting a story about this culinary school downtown. Wichita State has opened this culinary program downtown. And they had just gotten the place done construction-wise, and they were letting me do a tour. And there were 4 people from WSU Tech, 4 PR people following me around. No, don't shoot that. No, and I'm like, listen, why the hell did you invite me here? You said I could come in and look at your building. Well, that's what I'm going to do. And I don't need 4 of you standing around telling me how to do my job. So that's the biggest annoyance for me, is that whether it's in sports or business, the PR arms of these organizations have grown, and a lot of them are former journalists that have gotten out of the business and went to that side of media. But it's made my job a little bit tougher because things are less organic than they used to be. Things are much more controlled, and that can even come down to, I've been into a number of towns that have been wiped out by a tornado, and I'd go in there and shoot the chaos, but now immediately it's like law enforcement controlled. No, you can't go here. Law enforcement is 10 times worse in this regard than every example I've just given you. It's pushing us further back. Stay away.
I mean, obviously their jobs are different from ours.
Sure.
But like, do do you feel like does there need to be some kind of balance between making your organization look good and obstructing, journalists, or what would be the consequences of over PR?
Well, it's eventually it just comes down to you're doing the bidding of the organization that you're covering rather than telling an unbiased story about it. That there's a lack of transparency when a situation or an environment is controlled by a PR person or a sports information director. And I think that you got to trust journalists to give an accurate representation of a event or a place or a thing. And organizations now, at almost all levels, try to control these things. And when someone asks me now, what's your favorite thing to shoot? It's something where nobody's going to bother me. And that's one of the reasons, like lately, my passion has been going out and shooting photos of our landscape, because nobody's going to bother me when I go out and shoot some buffalo at sunset, or the northern lights, or this old stone house on the prairie.
Go back to that one in Topeka. Tell them how you shot that picture.
Well, that's a drone picture, obviously, and I am a FAA licensed drone pilot, which I have to be. A lot of people just buy drones and throw them up, but when you operate a drone, you are operating under the laws of the FAA. You are an unmanned aerial system pilot, and if you don't follow the rules of that, you can be in big trouble. And a lot of drone pilots don't realize this. I had to I had to make sure that I was in airspace here that was not what we call controlled airspace. So yeah, there's a lot of safety concerns. You crash a drone, who knows what property might get damaged. Sometimes I've done some drone work, freelance drone work for an energy company that does like wind turbines and solar systems. And when I fly my drone for them, I have to have a $2 million liability insurance for that day, which isn't that expensive, but I have to have that insurance in case, my drone takes out a blade on one of these wind turbines. The cost of replacement would be far more than I could ever, or if the drone crashed and started a fire. So yeah, there's lots of rules to that. That's a whole nother class. But yeah, when I'm out here doing these things, no one's going to tell me what to do.
Well, the people that.
What's that?
When you said that, you were showing the one from
Oh, the Northern Lights?
no, the place where they yelled at you for being there. The Coronado, or what was it? That one.
I think there's a different place. Oh, I'll show you. I know which one you're talking
Well,
about.
it's not important. Would y'all have some questions for Travis about how he does his job, or adventures he's had, or more perspective on PR or sports information or things like that? Anyone think of a question?
I'm interested, what camera are you using?
What camera?
Yeah.
So I use Canon cameras because that's what the Wichita Eagle buys for me. I'm glad that I use that brand. It's the major camera brands now are Nikon, Sony, and Canon, and Sony's kind of a new player in that game.
Canon, which one exactly?
So I use a camera called the R3, and it is, in the last few years I've switched from what we call DSLR, digital single lens reflex cameras, which is the ones you look through, there's a mirror, and the mirror flops up every time. That's called an SLR or a DSLR if it's digital. Now I'm using mirrorless cameras, which the viewfinder is an electronic, it's a very good electronic view, but I'm not actually seeing the real thing like I'm looking through a pair of binoculars. The advantages of mirrorless though is that the camera can shoot much faster. The camera that pushed film that I used in college shot at best 5 frames a second, which sounded like a machine gun in my hand. Now the cameras I use can shoot 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second.
A second?
A second.
Wow.
So, if I'm, shooting an outdoor sporting event and the shutter speed is 4/1000ths of a second, it's like basically 30 frames a second is video in most cases. You can shoot 60 frames a second video and you can shoot 120 frames a second video, and that's slow-mo. That's how you do slow-mo. And I can do all of that with these cameras. The nice thing about the Canon mirrorless stuff that I'm using now is that those are also my video cameras. This documentary that I'm working on right now was shot entirely on these, what we think of as still cameras. My coworker Jamie shoots Sony, I shoot Canon, and we shot it all on.
Dana, are you a photographer?
I want to be one.
Well, cool.
So I have a variety of lenses, but typically I have one wide angle, 15 to 35 millimeter zoom, and another camera with a longer lens, 70 to 200 zoom. That covers 95% of everything I shoot. I have these big old 400 millimeter, big giant white lenses you see on the sideline of sporting events. I got one of those too. I shoot a lot of this outdoor stuff with those lenses, but it's also my primary sports lens too.
And just so everybody knows, when you work for an organization, taking photos or videos, they provide you generally all the camera gear.
Right.
And so Travis has so much crap in our house, there's nowhere to put it. Like, you've got how many lenses, how many camera bodies?
Yeah, a lot of it's like antiquated stuff now too. I mean, I still have the digital cameras that have mirrors in them. And sometimes I'll use them for remote cameras or time-lapse cameras.
How many cameras do you think you have?
I have 3 that I use primarily, and there's probably 4 just laying around the house that, in fact, I gave one of them to a high school girl that was in need of a camera. That was my primary camera for a decade.
And you also have like lenses, you have the drone, you have like
Yeah, I've got a lot
lighting
equipment. I have lights, when I shot the portrait of the 2 Native American ladies with the statue, there's a light set up, with a softbox, we call it, or an umbrella to soften it. And I have stands and a lot of stuff.
And you have like microphones and all that stuff for video making?
Yeah, so the biggest thing about video is audio. Nothing makes video unwatchable more than crappy sound. And so like that's been a learning experience for me over the years, is knowing that, like, I know that video that she's filming ain't gonna sound great because that camera's way over there.
It'll be all right.
And I can hear, like, there's a hum in this room right now. Like, we're not aware of it because we're just used to that sound. But like, I would walk in here if I was doing a video and be like, what can I do about that hum? Can I do anything about it? Now then, in the software, there will be something that will like filter out that hum, but I'm aware of it, even though I can't hear for shit. I'm aware of it because that would be a problem, just like walking into a room and noticing that the light is bad. I would be aware of that.
Does anybody else have a question about photography or things like that?
If
Has
not,
it
that's all
sparked all
right.
your curiosity?
You all stayed awake, which I appreciate, so.
Without glazed over looks?
No, not so bad.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like I'm teaching photojournalism at Wichita State right now, and same time of the day, 8 o'clock in the morning, so I know. You guys probably all live on campus, right? Or close? Yeah, most of my kids are coming from, the West Wichita, so they It's not unusual for someone to walk in 10 minutes late to my class
At 8 AM.
at 8 AM, yeah.
So, does anybody have any questions for Travis that you need clarification for your paper? Everything was clear? You understood everything?
I will tell you, I've been a photographer at the Eagle since 1997, if that's helpful to you. I'll spell my last name one more time, Heying, even though I told you I'd only do it once. Yeah,
It's also
so,
on the Canvas assignment, so there's no excuse to get it wrong.
right, okay.
No more
So-
questions? Danny, you can ask more camera questions if you want.
I'm good,
Don't
I
feel
think,
bad.
for now.
I'll tell you that those cameras, I would not own if I had to pay for them. I'd own something.
How much does one of them cost of the camera?
One of the Canon R3s is $5,000.
Yeah, we just checked the price. It's not my budget.
Yeah,
We
now
have
there are,
$15,000 a camera sitting in our house?
yeah, so they were 6,000 when they were new.
Nobody come rob us.
And, the one lens is 2,000, each of the lenses are about $2,000 each. The big old 400-2.8, to buy one of those brand new, $11,000.
Oh my God.
So,
And one time, you guys, when Travis was younger, he got all of his cameras stolen from his car.
yeah, I got robbed in 2004. And I had one of those big $10,000 lenses in the back of the car. I was not in favor with the editor of the paper at that time. It was
Pretty mad at him.
Sherry was, because the other problem was I also had one of those projectors in the back, because I was giving a speaking engagement. That projector was like worth $5,000 at the time.
Oh, Lord.
Sherry was pissed. That was a rough time. All right, you got a question?
What's a good camera to start off with? Like,
Good camera to start off with.
That we can afford.
Yeah, there's a lot of people talk about the Canon Rebel. You know, you can get these kids with, this is a mirrored camera, not a mirrorless. But look, you can get a Canon with a lens for $400, which I know isn't cheap, but you also go on a used site and probably find 1,000 of these for $200 or $300. I don't know what, I think there's like, let's see, R8 maybe? Okay, that's a little pricey, but I mean, look, this camera, this R8, shoots 4K video at $1,200. They have another camera called the R7, and it's not much cheaper, but that's with the lens, $1,500.
Dana asked Santa for it for Christmas.
Here you go, the R10, that's their cheapest, or R100, this is their cheapest mirrorless camera, the R10.
Would that shoot pretty good stuff?
Well, sure, yeah. The sensor is a little smaller than what's the sensor in my camera, and all that means is that if you put a 15 millimeter lens on that camera, it would be 15 times 1.5 or 1.6. So because you're using a less part of the frame area, it looks like it's cropped. Like the lens you put on this camera is going to look a little different than the lens you put on my camera if it's the same lens. But it's still a high res, good image. That's just one of the ways they bring the price down, is this way. So this would be like their cheapest mirrorless camera with a lens.
Can you talk just real briefly before we go about the advancements in the cameras on your phone and what you can do with your phone cameras?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm the most qualified person
But
to.
they've gotten a lot better, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm an iPhone guy, so always have been, so I can't speak to the other companies and other brands, but sometimes if like I'm at a news event and a police officer comes up to give a statement about this car crash scene or this murder scene, I'll just pull out my phone and shoot the video off my phone. I'll only do that if I can get within 3 or 4 feet of him, because sound is important. But you know, the videos that come off of these things, like I just had a documentary in the Tallgrass Film Festival a couple weeks ago, and I was paired up with a couple other short films, and these 2 sisters made a little project entirely on their iPhones, and it looked as good as just about anything else. So the quality of video, the main thing about phones is the second you start zooming in, you know, to a thing, it's gonna, you know, some of these iPhones have a little bit better reach now, but
The quality of the image goes down.
yeah, they are wide angle lenses by nature. So if you don't zoom in, you're gonna have a pretty good quality image, you know. And these things do like some internal post-production, we'll call it. Every time you take a picture, it's gonna apply some special sauce, nothing out of any ethical boundaries, but it's gonna, you know, now it's like, you know, it's annoying to me because I'm worried about, is any photo we look at now real? Like, it's a real question. Like, and it bothers me. Like, I just updated to the newest version of Photoshop last week. And it gives me a list of, here are all the new functions in Photoshop. And they are all AI. You want to put in a new sky? You want to get rid of something? That's all it is. And like, even on your phones now, it's like, you know, the ads for the Google Pixel or whatever will be like, take a picture. Oh, there's a dude. I'm getting a call, Denise, I need to take.
Okay,
So yeah, the AI stuff bothers me.
thank you. Oh, by the way, on Saturday, Travis was, our street floods in front of our house, because we have bad drainage, and he was trying to jump from the street, over the puddle so we don't have to walk through it, and he tore his Achilles tendon. So now he's gonna have to have surgery. He fell. He didn't land.
Sorry. It's the
Oh.
doctor's office. Obviously, you can see I've
I
had
just told them what you did, and all of them know about Achilles tendon because they're athletes.
Yes.
Have any of y'all ever torn your Achilles tendon? Or
I
had a
don't-
teammate who
I
did?
don't recommend it.
Yeah. I was hoping they would tell you it was gonna be okay.
Well,
They injure themselves all the time.
I know I got a long road ahead. All right.
Thank
I
you.
assume none of you have any more questions. Is your class over, Denise?
Yeah.
So,
Thank you guys very much for.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
paying attention.
All right,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Travis, for chatting. Okay, I'll see you guys on Tuesday, and don't forget to do your Travis paper by then. What are you guys snacking on? Chocolate? It's too early for that.
I do.